Welcome back to the Failing Upward Club. This is a podcast dedicated to reflecting on the tough lessons from failure, working out how to improve and not repeat the same mistakes again. Danny, I've really struggled with that intro. Welcome. How are you feeling today? Hopefully you're going to carry us through this episode.
I was struggling with that intro as well, mate. As soon as you started talking I think it was take 15 by the time you got to that one. You had a really abbreviated intro. And I was struggling to hold it together. So if anyone's watching the video, they probably saw the smirk. But no, I'm excited. I'm happy to be here again, Mike. Has been a lot of things happening in the world, and a lot of things happening in the world of the Failing Upward Club as well. Some good support that continues to stream through. A lot of fun topics being able to talk through, and I think we've got a doozy today considering our background. You've kind of had two swings at this kind of domain, and I've been around in a couple of different organisations for that. But what are we talking about today, Mike? What's the doozy of a topic?
Yeah, I like it. Today we're going to focus on corporate innovation, Danny. So all things corporate innovation. I guess before we get into the key lessons, maybe just a quick kind of definition piece. So when we think about corporate innovation, we've seen corporate innovation spun up and spun down and spun up again many different times across large enterprise in Australia and actually globally. And there's probably three different kind of elements to corporate innovation. There's corporate venture capital. There's the kind of innovation lab or accelerator, and then there's an innovation focused strategic partnerships. And now what I've experienced, what I've seen globally is that businesses will mix and match those components in different ways, depending on the strategic objective that they're trying to achieve with their corporate innovation function. So maybe we'll get into an overview of the key lessons. This is the typical structure that we do on this pod, and then we can jump into it. So the first one we're going to unpack is around really starting at the top and the fact that executive sponsorship is necessary but not sufficient. So obviously it's key to getting the corporate innovation function started, but there's much more to the eventual success than just a big executive sponsor in your corner. A really critical one, and I guess this is where we've got a lot of learnings from the trenches, Danny, is that the enterprise cycles really kill innovation, and often there's just a distinct mismatch between the way an enterprise operates and the way they kind of just move through planning and funding and those type of things, and the way that innovation typically needs to run. The next one then being that strategy misalignment, and this is true for many businesses, but particularly in this innovation space, that a strategy misalignment can really be the thing that just pulls it all apart. Corporate venture capital is a great example that without a clear alignment with how they're creating value back to the core business, that's either by just pure investment returns, that could be investments that in businesses that are innovative, that the core business is going to leverage and work with, and a number of different things in between. It doesn't really matter what happens. If that alignment's not there from the start, it's ultimately going to mean the destruction, regardless of the kind of pure performance on paper. One around the integration being super important, and actually the challenge that a lot of corporate innovation functions suffer with is that bringing external capabilities back into a big enterprise business is actually really, really hard. And what we've experienced is that one of the failure modes is that the core business or the innovation function doesn't really invest in the dedicated resources and the people with enough enterprise gravitas, I would say, to actually make that happen in an effective way and in a time frame of relevance. And the final one there, as I've touched on the people, is you really can't ignore the people element. And there's a whole heap we'll talk about there in good time. So Danny, looking forward to getting into it. Do you think there's anything on the key learnings that I've brushed over that you want to throw on the docket right now, or do we get into it?
No, I think the acronym of like TLDR is about being too long, didn't read. And I think we're getting to the point where we're pushing the boundary on what the fucking summary is, Mike. Jeez.
Yeah, right.
How fucking long is that? Okay. There's a lot of juice in that. That's all right. This is a spicy topic. There's lots of things that we've got a view of, but yeah, I don't want to add anything more to it. I just want to get into the conversation actually after that. But I think it's worth maybe framing a couple of things for people who are listening or who are following along with the content of why we're talking so much in this space, and particularly from the reflections of what we had with the DataCo journey. So for those who don't know, the company that we started of DataCo came out of a corporate innovation lab. The particular model was through 1835I, or at the time it was called ANZI, associated with ANZ Bank. Again, this is all public, so we can say all of that. And that their capability really had this a few different like levers and pillars to it, and it was all around the whole build buy partner style model, where they had a pure corporate venture capital style investment structure. They had an innovation lab, which was really about building new capabilities where they saw a gap in the market where they needed something to be done, but there was nothing that was serving that, and also just a more partnership style function between the two. But a lot of the focus really was on the investment or the build side of the fence. So we've gone through this journey and saw quite a lot of kind of what happens in those models, and I think that's where a lot of the reflections today are. But your previous work to that, for those who don't know, Mike, was you also did a lot of work over at NAB originally with the NAB Labs and their kind of innovation concept. So while both of these are at banking, I've seen like into other organizations and industries, including some work with one of the large insurers and their similar style functions. So a few different viewpoints we're bringing to the conversation today, but I think a lot of it's coming from particularly building those companies, but even investing. But yeah, maybe should we start from the top, Mike? Like we start thinking about what you're kind of learning from what it means for corporate innovation or these kind of functions to get off the ground. Like, I don't know, there's a lot of things that you said in that summary, which are like, what are the big killers and what are the things that can make it go wrong? Do you think out of that list, there's anything that is this is the first one out of all of these things, if you could get one thing right, that's the one to pick out and talk about? Or do you think actually they've all got reasonably equal weighting and it's a death by many cuts when corporate innovation doesn't work?
I think it's the latter, but I think the logical place to start, because actually what I've seen in the industry is there's actually some of the players that have spun up and spun down labs over the years. It feels like I was talking to an old colleague of ours actually last week, Danny, where it actually feels like we might be about to enter another cycle, the third or fourth cycle of corporate innovation in Australia. So I think given that is kind of the background and the context that's going on in the market, maybe we start with right at the start, like how do you structure these functions and actually where do they fit inside of the organization. So I said up at the top of my very long, which was too long, that executive sponsorship is necessary but not sufficient. And maybe if we get into the structural piece of that, I guess I've seen two different versions of this firsthand. And the learnings there was that in my experience at NAB, ultimately the corporate innovation function sat inside of a business unit, and it sat as a responsibility amongst many others of a kind of a mid-level, ultimately manager inside of that business. I would say that type of structure is too low. Now, when that corporate innovation function started, it was sponsored by the then CEO, Andrew Thorburn. Unfortunately, I joined right around the time the Royal Commission started into banking in 2017, I think it was, and Andrew departed not long after his fronting at that event. And then we ended up being stuck inside of the business without a high level executive sponsor. And then, the writing was on the wall that the team didn't have too much longer to exist. Part to that, as you've described, or the other mode that I've seen is actually probably where I would say it's almost too high. And when we came into ANZI, the gentleman responsible for ANZI, Ron Spector, reported directly into Miley, sat on the executive floor. I think that was a great structure, and I probably came in going, great, ANZ solved it all. What I learnt through that, though, was actually probably having too much executive support can rub the business the wrong way. And actually, it's very, very critically important that even though you have executive support and structurally it looks like you've got everything you would possibly need, that you're not then under the illusion you don't need to do the work at the ground floor and build the relationships with the core business, the people actually out there doing the job. So that's what I've kind of taken away from that.
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point. And the more you were talking through that and I was thinking through some of the other key points you spoke about, all of these problems do interlink and they're all kind of interrelated. And really what you're talking about there does touch on the last one you said through there, which is around the people element of this whole thing. It's like this is what it's just like with any large organization. There's so many layers where something can get killed. And it's like, as you said, you need the executive support at the top. If you don't have that, you're going to struggle to get through anything else. But you need to find the way to get through all of the different layers, get through the process buy-ins, get through whatever you need to do, top and tail through that whole process. And I think as I said, the truth is when you've got the executive support, sometimes you've got some of those process smashers in large organizations, and when the CEO is saying, yeah, this needs to happen, it definitely speeds up processes. But then it's about what are the other layers throughout that whole kind of value chain where you need to get people's buy-in, and you need to get them online, and you need to make sure that they're all pushing towards the same journey. So one of the things that we did from the lessons from the DataCo perspective, and again, there was lots of good things and there was lots of challenging things that happened through that journey. But I think one of the really good things we did in the early days was it did start with this idea that was still more closely related inside the organization. And one of the things we did in literally the first 6 months was bringing people together from all aspects of life in that business, all the way up to the chief data officer who reported directly into the CEO, down to the cybersecurity teams, the privacy teams, the legal teams, the governance teams, the tech teams on the ground doing what they needed to do. We would run these fortnightly showcases that literally were just like, here's where we are, this is what we're doing, this is like where the direction is, and just got buy-in and excitement on the whole process and generated that ground up support really to how you can get something off the ground. And I think that model of, and we can touch on this a little bit around the internal external, even though we were the innovation kids, call it that, the ones in their jeans and their sneakers, and they're not wearing the banker's outfit and they're sitting on slightly to the side, there's a natural cultural conflict which we'll come to as well. But we just generated that buy-in that everyone felt like they were part of the initiative from the start. And that platform and foundation of what we did was a huge part of why we got it off the ground in the first instance. Those relationships, literally to the day that the company was shut down, some of those relationships were still there inside the bank from literally the first showcases that were running. So I think there's this people element to align with your executive point is a really important point to tie together.
Yeah, and I think there's two really important elements there, Danny, and it was just something we did, but I don't think it should be underplayed. I think one of the things that achieved is obviously with, the agile ways of working and the whole kind of structure around agile, like that concept of a showcase every fortnight is something that was familiar to the business. So I think in many ways it almost was us paying respect to the kind of pattern of engagement or the business process that was already going on. And I think that shouldn't be overlooked as well. It's kind of a nod to, we operate in a slightly different way and we're trying to accelerate and we're doing things a little bit differently, but we're going to kind of align to this process that's widely adopted across the business. And I think that familiarity gets people comfortable. One of the key lessons that I was sort of told when I first joined the NAB Labs function was that as an innovation function, it's really important that wherever possible, you're innovating with and alongside a business and you're not innovating on a business. And the distinct ways that that's different is by that early engagement, you bring people along on the journey as you've described, as opposed to building in isolation and then pushing something back into an enterprise going, hey, you've just got to do this because the exec said we're going to do it on your business. It never goes well. But I think some of those kind of key decisions early meant that we were very much working alongside the business wherever possible, bringing the key people along on the journey.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, aligning with some of the other ones that you spoke about before, it really does point to that key failure mode, I think, for the majority of these innovation initiatives or businesses that come through here, which do become the integration problem. So this was the one that you spoke about down your list in your massively long rant at the start. It was really about the challenge bringing external capabilities and plugging them back inside the business. It's like you've got this foreign organism and you're trying to put it inside a body, and all of a sudden all of the the cells inside the body are like, attack, this is outside, this is something different, let's just kill it. And that's the nature of most enterprise organizations. They've got this kind of culture, they've got this resistance to anything that's through there, and that has multiple elements to the whole thing. Like there's a process element to it, there's a tech element to it, because it's very hard to integrate tech, but like at the heart of it all, it's a people thing. And similar to the whole point you said before around how people get their nose up if you come in and say, oh, the CEO said to do this and we're just going to do this on your business. Like generally, if the right people aren't included, there's a resistance to, why do you get to do the fun stuff? Like that's the question which starts to come up. It's like, I'm sitting here and I'm slaving away at my day job, and we've got hundreds of ideas of cool things we could do to innovate on the business. And what about this cool product, all these things to do? But day after day after day, they're just told, you need to focus, you just need to deliver this, we need to get just this thing done. And this thing is boring and it's shitty and it's regulatory compliance, or it's remediating some kind of bug that they've got, or it's just delivering on the basic experience, which just happens to suck. And they just look at these people who come in with their jeans and their sneakers, and they're like, who the fuck are you guys? Like, do you think that like we don't have good ideas? And I remember there was once this innovation hackathon style thing that we did with the bank, and it was like, oh, what are these cool product ideas? And green was a really hot topic, like all of the, how do you make things green? I was like, oh, what about a green home loan? And it's got all this like, to do with the house, and there are all these things. And I remember going into this meeting with these other people from different parts of the innovation function. Everyone was in little groups or whatever. And there was this guy from the home loans team, and he just sat there and he was just like, we've just spent the last 3 years trying to simplify all we're doing just so we can deliver the core product. And you guys reckon we just come in here and do these like really crazy complex ideas that sound like they're a bit... He called it out straight away. And I was like, fair enough, dude. Like, you have to do the grunt work at the moment. And all these people come in pretending that they're going to solve all the problems. That cultural issue is a huge part of why innovation fails.
Benny, I reckon that's a very astute observation, and not something that I'd captured as a part of our learnings. But do you think it'd be fair to say innovation functions, and I've definitely seen this, are guilty, like, because I think one of the things that innovation does through the introduction of, say, like journey mapping in the early days and HCD and all those type of things, innovation functions, I reckon, I'm going to go out on a limb and say they do a great job of obsessing the customer. And for many, that was the early wins that were delivered by corporate innovation. The introduction of HCD and journeys and all that kind of stuff meant the organization naturally pivoted more and was anchored around like the customer, probably more than they'd ever been. I think the key thing that was forgotten in all of that was that we were focused on the customer, but we weren't focused enough on the realities of the business day to day. And I reckon if the same empathy was applied to the business and learning about the struggles from the employees and what they're trying to deliver day to day, as was put on the customer, a marriage of those two is probably the winning combination that I reckon a lot of functions have just like completely skimmed over.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think this same learning applies to just software companies or any companies in general, right? You always walk in and you say, hey guys, we've solved it. We've got this amazing new hammer that we created and we're going to be able to smack all of the nails and you're all good. And you go into the business and like they know hammers exist and they know that nails like can be hitting with hammers, and they're just like, guys, we're stuck. We don't even have any nails. We haven't produced the nails. Like all has been coming out of these fucking screws, and they don't just hammer into the wall. And we were told ages ago but we're sitting here at this like production site trying to create some nails, and we're trying to do that. Like they're just so far apart in terms of what someone's like, hey, here I've got the solution. Sorry. Whereas that's again where good businesses who sell products which are truly useful and get massive take up, but also like where you see the good corporate innovation style capabilities come through is where there is that appreciation to go in and say, no, let's truly understand what is the problem, what's going on through here. And maybe what we thought was the solution is absolutely not the solution we should be focused on solving. And it may be way up in the value chain from where someone thought. But you're right, where that the internal mechanism of what people need to do their jobs and how they can solve that problem it's a massive part of how you actually get to value. And just saying, oh, here's a band-aid and this is something cool for the customer doesn't get the cut through when you need to go and implement it.
Yeah, spot on. I think, Danny, not to just wrap up this integration point too quickly, but just to bring it back to some direct learnings that we had through DataCo. So on integration and on DataCo more broadly, we started our journey inside of ANZI proper. So we had the blue hats and blue badges. We then spun the business out of the bank. Immediately at that point, we became a standalone and a separate entity. So literally overnight, things changed. We were no longer inside the bank working alongside our peers. We're an external vendor trying to sell a solution into the bank. And literally overnight, that change was felt. Lawyers stopped talking to us. The business responded differently. I think one thing that 1835i did very well, and we benefited from enormously, was that they hired someone who had an enormous amount of political capital within inside of the business, had proven capability to deliver big enterprise projects, and brought that gentleman into 1835i. Shout out, Anthony. Thank you for everything you did. And then assigned him to work as our conduit back into the core business. And as you said before, kind of go in, run the process, identify the right people, but work as a kind of an independent, impartial advisor, not as the external DataCo entity that of course was commercially motivated to push this project through as quick as we could and get an outcome. And I think, again, if we're thinking about businesses standing up these functions and going through the cycle again, absolutely a key part of that is having either someone that's impartial and can work between, or someone inside the business who is motivated and incentivized to run that integration work. It's really hard. It's going to be a tough job. It can be like brutal at times, but you need someone who's proven in that function and can just go and get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out Mr. Freeze. What a guy. But yeah, it's such an important point, Mike. And I think there's a few things that stem from it. I think fundamentally, the reason for having some of these things like the corporate innovation, or when you're going to do venturing in this space, the reason you need to have it either right at the periphery or completely independent comes down to speed, right? It comes down to how fast you can build, pivot, evolve a capability. Like, we knew there was structural reasons why the DataCo concept needed to be independent because of the security model, because of the trust model, but also just in terms of how fast you need to build a technology platform like that. You just couldn't do it internally. If we tried to do what we did inside the bank, I have no doubt the total cost would have been like minimum 10x in terms of just the cost to build it, and the capabilities we built would have been like, I don't know, probably 10x in the other direction slower. Like, that's just the reality of what it takes to build stuff in some of those large organizations, and the money that's involved and all the process constraints and everything else. So you need to be able to have the capabilities to build faster, to build independent, to think about commercial independence as well, so you can go and fund it not only through there and go and build partnerships and all the rest of that good stuff. But to your point, if you're going to go and leverage that style of capability where you've got something external, or you're going to invest in a startup which is external, which can move at pace, you need that connection point. And that connection point is a people aspect, and you need the people on both sides to be able to get that through. And I think a lot of the time, and there was early in the 1835i journey, we tried to do it externally. I'm purely externally. And it was like, we'll set up the kind of partnershipsy function from the outside, and then just try to like push that into the business. But you need the people inside the large enterprise to have the KPIs, all of the metrics that saying this is what it's got. Like, I'm marked on this being successful, and with the access to the political capital and the networks and everything internally to get stuff done. And those are those process smashers, and the best initiatives we ever saw inside the bank in general, but I've seen at other large enterprise organizations going down this model, the ones who have those people who are committed and aligned and dedicated inside an organization or very, very closely aligned to it, like Mr. Freeze, and can help push through the process, get things done and get things in. There was another part of the business with another partner we worked with in the early days, and they'd just done this independently. They were working with an external vendor in a really successful way, like delivering some awesome capability, and they just set someone up internally to work alongside the vendor to get through the internal processes, to think ahead of time, to go through the checklist of 15 different things and the 12 teams you got to talk to. It's a huge part of being successful in this innovation stuff is you have to think through how you get it back in. And we already spoke about the people cultural problem in terms of the buy-in, but there is just that dedicated capability you need to push it through.
Yeah, and you flagged this early on in our journey, and one of the benefits you had from sitting inside of consulting from so long and a bit of tech delivery and that type of stuff as well is that especially the way the banks operate, right? It's such that risk is kind of the ultimate objective, and mitigating risk is the ultimate objective. So there's these kind of processes that, regardless of the executive sponsorship you've got, like there's no way to sidestep them. And I think when I've seen the kind of partnerships go wrong, I've seen a bit of misalignment or miscommunication in what a CVC will promise a company, a portfolio company, by way of, hey, we've made the investment. Now the next logical step is like integration into the core. And the portfolio companies have their rose-colored glasses on. They've taken some money and they're like, yeah, no, it's okay because the head of this CVC, and he introduced me to an exec and he said he loves what we're going to do, so we're going to deliver it. We'll be onboarded in 6 weeks. And it's like, no, it never works like that. Like it's 12 months. And I think the other thing that needs to be true for CVCs to be successful, because a part of success is also being successful in delivering what you say you're going to deliver in the market, right? Your reputation for the portfolio companies or from the portfolio companies is very, very important. And I think one of the things that a lot of people overlook is just that story that doesn't quite land many times over. As you said, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And it's very, very important to manage the expectations up front as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that false sense of security in terms of someone spoke to someone at an executive layer, like this is, again, we've seen that happen in just other like normal startup kind of mode, other vendors trying to go in, they sit there and they have the big workshop. I remember sitting on some with some large vendors and they're talking to the CEO of the bank and they're talking to the chief strategy officer and he's like, this sounds good. And they're walking away and they're high five and they're like, we're in. It's like, oh, no. I remember there was one, again, I'm not going to name names in either direction here, but I remember one of the executives saying to a vendor once, they were like, but we've been like on this path for this like this RFP style trying to get a capability, and they're like, we've been having these conversations and we've been on the sales cycle for 3 years, and he was like, then you're about halfway there then, and it was just like that was the honest truth, and they probably still not anywhere close to closing that deal. So like sometimes there is this expectation setting around what you need to do, and this goes back to your first point around from the executive to the bottom. You need to have that support and you need that to push down, but you need to get the people on the ground to do the work before anything happens. But maybe let's pivot, Mike. Still staying on the same theme of the executive, I think one of the key points you were talking about before was to do with the strategy. And I think there's a few ones which are a killer, but this one is definitely a killer. And this is the one where it's really hard to get right. And this goes down to a whole lot of like textbook business theory, people doing MBAs or people thinking through business strategy will know all about a lot of the concepts in this space and thinking through what is it about horizons and looking at things like the Ansoff matrix and saying, here's where I'm going to go expand a market or launch new products or do different things. And there's so much theory around what this looks like. And a lot of the reason for corporate innovation functions is really to be lifting the line of sight a bit off the immediate horizon. And a lot of time, all of the core business, everyone internal is looking at what you need to do now, what is the current market, how do you deliver on that? And most of the time, these innovation functions or the CVCs and where they're investing are looking at Horizon 2 or Horizon 3. But sometimes I think they're thinking the really, I think they go to Horizon 3. And Horizon 3 is like, what is going to fundamentally change the game? What's coming down the line? And for ages, people were being like, oh, it's got to be blockchain and that'll change your bank, or it's going to be whatever it is. Obviously, AI is a big one at the moment. But what they miss is the clear strategy from the business to say, this is where we are, this is where we think we're going to go, here are the capabilities we need to fill for the gap of where we're moving our business from a strategic perspective, and this is the spaces you need to be able to innovate, bring them in, suck them into the strategy and pull them along. And I think without that guidance, you end up with people in these innovation functions or CVCs just saying, what are really good ideas and what do I think could change the business? And they'll go and find something and they'll bring a capability, and it's either got no direct path to supplementing the core, or it's just down a path where the bank's like, you know what, we're just not going to go down there for a very long time, maybe not ever. And it's not clear what the strategy is meant to be for that CVC. And I've seen that with a number of different innovation functions in terms of them trying to nearly not guess what they have to do, but there's just not the clear alignment to say, all right, here's really what it looks like to pull them in. It gets really conceptual. And again, it's hard to define that, I know, because Horizon 2 and 3 by definition are like a evolving, changing beast. But I think that lack of strategy and that lack of strategic alignment between what's going on with an innovation lab or a CVC compared to the core business is a huge, huge threat to the CVC or the innovation function, because it means they've got a goalpost which will always change and they'll never be able to demonstrate that they're really successful. Because by nature, it's not just about, and this is I think a key one to also call out in CVC, success of a CVC is not purely about just base economic return on capital. It's not a venture capital firm. It's not saying I invested in this company and I got a 100x return. Sometimes that 100x return to a core entity like a bank, they're like, so what? Actually, all you've done is invest in something that, yes, it was very successful and it got through there, but it doesn't bring anything back to my core, or maybe it increases risk, or it's not strategic. And ultimately that can be seen as unsuccessful. While it does generate capital, it's not always the intention. But again, it comes back to the strategy. If the strategy is not clear, then how is an organization meant to know whether they're investing purely for capital returns or whether it is really trying to drive value back to the core?
Yeah, that's a super interesting point, Danny. And I think there's probably a couple of things in that, right? It's actually it's also acknowledging that I think the strategy of enterprises, the strategic kind of horizon that they're planning to is typically like 3 years, right? Is what I've seen in large enterprise. So what you're kind of describing there is actually from a strategy corp dev kind of team and function holistically. Actually what you need to be able to do is butt up the enterprise strategy, which has a 3-year kind of forward-looking view, alongside like the innovation strategy, which now needs to kind of be cohesive and coherent, which is 3 to 5 to 7 and maybe beyond. But I think what you end up doing, as you've described, is the 3-year strategy is a very well thought through and well planned, as it should be. That's what's driving a 10,000 plus person organization forward. But actually, there is no real kind of alignment and consensus and sign off on, does that 3-year strategy then meet the 3 to 7 year strategy that the innovation function has defined? And where I think I've seen that fail is that actually the person leading the innovation function doesn't really or hasn't really played that role to say, no, I am the spokesperson. And again, this requires a whole lot of political capital and, sales capability and gravitas to kind of get up there alongside a CEO and say, hey, this is where the core business is going in the next 3 years. And here's the guy that's helping me define what 3 to 7 years looks like. And together that's our plan. And as you've described, it's not about being 100% successful on the bets you make in that 3 to 7 year horizon, because you can't be, but it's about how are we putting a kind of a small bet out there so that we can see around the next corner a little bit quicker than probably our competitors are thinking about in this space. And once we've brought back that learning, that's going to be the thing that informs the next kind of 3-year planning cycle. And we're going to win because we've got We've got some bets in that space. We've got some learnings in that space. We've actually pulled some great people in from a portfolio company. Like, there's a number of ways it can win, but I've not seen firsthand, in my experience, the actual marrying up of those two distinct strategies and how they form this cohesive plan.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of that, there's a few different reasons for some of those things not coming to a head, I think, in some of these organizations. And the truth is, no matter how much people want to be innovative for some of these large organizations, they really never intend to be as innovative as the person who's running the innovation kind of side of the business wants to be. Because innovation and change is risk. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of these organizations which are so big, and like the banking sector is 100% in this space, where like they're not made and designed and operated to change that fast. They're a steady asset. If you follow the value chain up to the capital, which sits behind some of these organizations, they're not being invested into 10x. People aren't investing major money into banks to 10x their returns. That's not the game that's being played at a large capital allocation perspective. It's consistency. It's low risk. It's about when someone's got a portfolio of assets at that massive capital perspective, they know that there's a consistent, steady return that's going to happen in there. Yes, it's got to be protected. I don't want the downside risk to become too big, but I'm also not going to go and just rewrite the whole bank to be this big digital thing overnight. So I think getting to the point where there is also that alignment around, all right, how innovative are we really going here, and tempering those expectations and working out where it is also a big part of that. And I think the one that ties to all of that is the final point that you were raising before, Mike, as well, which is really around the cycles. And this is fundamentally, this is really what was one of the key drivers behind where we ended up with a business. And it wasn't direct for us, it was more the on-flow effect of what this meant. But it was, you change an executive at the top, like a CEO, someone running a business, you are going to get widespread change most of the time throughout the rest of the organization, because it's very similar to like a political landscape, right? Like you get a new president or a prime minister who comes in every 4 to 8 years. They want to put their own swing on things. They want to do their own policies. They need their own things to be successful, and they want to show why they're in that role and why they need to maintain that role. And so the natural evolution of leadership through organizations will forever be a threat to some of those innovative things, because it becomes an easy target where it's like that was the pet project of the previous predecessor of like a CEO. And you can say, no, you know what, we're going to do things different, and my strategy is going to be different, and my innovation is going to be different. So there's always just going to be that threat, I think, in this corporate innovation space. And maybe that's why we've had so many cycles already going through it, and why I'm sure there'll be cycles to come around people saying, right, well, what is the lens I'm going to do on this? What is my core underlying strategy that I'm going to put on this business, and where am I going to take it? And again, going back to this allocation of capital and what is someone really looking for? At the end of the day, those big established organizations will always protect the core. That's just like when things are, if it looks like I'm being distracted, I'm trying to do too much, I have to protect the core. I have to protect my core business. It's made of money for many years. I go back, I protect the core, and then work out how I kind of branch out and diversify from that. It's just that's the risk that exists with corporate innovation. And I think anyone being involved in corporate innovation just needs to know that's the expected path. That's the timeline. And I think the disconnect there becomes most new organizations aren't a success overnight. And a venture that's like a purely born venture, and this is the build capability, like it takes many years for a company to be an overnight success. And if you don't give these ventures the right path to go through and do the right learnings and do the iteration, then they're never going to get to that point of maturity and be able to survive. We felt like we were on the edge of the black hole. We were reaching the speed to be able to launch out and be independent. We'll be fine. We're going to live in the universe for a while, but we just got caught on that event horizon where we got one limb was stuck and it just sucked the whole thing in.
Like getting ripped out of an aeroplane, Danny, when the door falls off.
That's it. That's exactly it. So, but I do
Well,
think like coming back to just the final lessons, Mike, just to kind of wrap us up really here for today. I like the lessons in this. Like, sure, there's some corporate venture capital lessons, but I think the main lessons for the people is really around. It's I don't know. I struggle to think about corporate venture capital in the same way. Like once you're burnt, and there's a few people I've spoken to over the last couple of weeks who all have similar scars from corporate venture capital experiences, and it's always the same story. It's like on the outside, it looks like a great situation. Even even someone who I know who had investment from literally every major bank in Australia, and it sounds like, oh, that's a business which will absolutely be successful, but it's a false sense of hope a lot of the time, and it's always the thing that I always heard, and the one word which always comes through in this space is potential. It's like there's so much potential in the model. There's so much potential if you get it right, but repeatedly there is not too many people who've got it right. And so I think if you're going into that space and you're thinking about starting a business that's through a CVC or being tied up with one of those large organizations, it's just make sure you've got a certain level of skepticism around, to your point, like how long will it really take to get to value? Like what's really coming with the, yes, you get this halo effect of being associated with it. Maybe there's some revenue there to keep you going, but it's not all upside, and there's a heap of risk that small organizations who take on to go down that path. But again, same with if you're going to take any investment from anyone, right? If, as soon as you're losing control and you're not fully steering the ship, there's risk you're taking on. Taking on capital comes with risk. So as long as you've got open eyes and you know some of the pitfalls and you know what is the right like path to maximize your chance of success, and that comes to a combination of things that we said before. It's you have to focus on the people. Yes, you have to get the executive sponsorship, but find your champions through the business. It's like any tech sell anyway. Find the people in the business who are really going to be the ones to push through the process, get you in. Just because you're invested by someone doesn't mean you're immune to the same sell that you'd have to do from any old startup or tech company into an enterprise.
spot on, Danny. Don't underestimate the sell. Always be selling. Well, on that note, thanks everyone for listening in to another episode of the Failing Up Club. If you like what you've heard, please like and subscribe. We're keen to get more guests on. We've got a couple more lined up over the next couple of weeks, but also very keen to talk to more people, bring these stories to light. So if you yourself has been through a failure and bounced out the other side and have some great lessons to share, or if there's anyone you can recommend, please drop us a note. Thanks for listening.